Hi friend! One of my favorite excursions in DC at the moment is the National Museum of African American History and Culture. If you're going to visit this wonderful museum, you should know these few things. Number one, pick a whole day. Don't think you're going to go through this museum and be content with only 2 to 3 hours in the museum. I would allot at least 5 hours so that you can read through the carefully crafted exhibits as well as explore both the upstairs and downstairs portion. Number two, start at the bottom of the museum. So you can take a wonderful spiral staircase, or there are elevators to help you, and you have to stand in line to wait to go through the bottom portion, but I promise you it's worth it to start at the bottom. The bottom encapsulates most of the history of the African American people as it relates to the United States of America and a little bit abroad. I tell you to start downstairs because it's a lot more emotional and it will shape kind of what you experience upstairs. I believe it's very symbolic the way that they have you go down through this elevator and the times are changing, and then you make your way back up through a ramp. As you go through time, you're climbing up. You don't quite finish at the top of the ramp, but that's definitely where we're going. And then after you finish going through the bottom portion, take a stop at the reflection pool. The reflection pool will be on your right as you leave the bottom portion of the museum, and that will give you time to think about all the things you've seen, all that's still to come, and where we're headed as the people. So you say, Fluke, start at the bottom, what's upstairs? I'm glad you asked. To me, upstairs feels more like the culture of African Americans. So it talks more about music, it talks about dance, it talks about the way in which we interact, it talks about hair. It's kind of that breath of fresh air when you head upstairs and you get to learn about stepping and you get to learn about magazines and sports. It's not all of who we are, but it's an integral backbone that we hold within this country, and it gives you more perspective, it gives you more pride if you start downstairs. There are showings of movies and speakers and things like that in the Oprah Winfrey Theater, so check out the calendar before you go to see if you can align your schedule with a wonderful event. Here's another thing you should know, pro tip. If you can't get tickets but you happen to be in DC, I would go up to the security guards or whoever's checking the tickets and say, hi, are there any free tickets that I may utilize on this day? I'm only in town here, or I'm only going to be around, and I was hoping that you could help me out. There's a good chance that you go on a day that's not so busy, they might let you in. The worst they can say is no, which is you'll just end up back where you started, which was outside of the museum. So I definitely ask if possible. I know on some days if you show up early and stand in line, you can get a certain amount of standby tickets, so check the website and maybe it'll be your lucky day. You should also know that there's a couple times you're gonna have to wait in line when you go to the museum. Perhaps you'll have to wait in line when you get to the museum and have to go through security. There's another time when you might have to wait, which is to go into the downstairs portion of the museum, as well as there's a long line usually to see Emmett Till in his casket. Well, I opted out also because we ran out of time to stand in line, but I didn't end up seeing the casket, and I think you should make the museum what it is for you, and if somebody else wanted to see it and it touched them, I know a lot of people came out crying and found it very moving. I read about the story and did the interactive portion about it instead, but I didn't particularly want to see it. I don't think that makes me any less black. Also, you should know about the National Museum of African American History and Culture. It might make you feel the feels, right? So when I went, every time somebody of European descent stood in front of me or did something entitled, not necessarily that it was that big of a deal, but just because I was in my feelings, it seemed bigger. Like at one point I was reading an exhibit and this European descent man walked in front of me, and then I tried to move over to the side, and as he was reading, he kept standing in front of me to the point where I was like, excuse me, sir. Like, you see, you have oppressed me enough throughout the years and now you want to step in front of me? Clearly I was projecting, so just know to keep in mind when you're at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, if you need to take a breather for a second or step away from a situation, no, you should never let anybody take advantage of you or disrespect you, but also it can just get you in your feelings a little bit, so warning. I also like the special attention that they played to women in African American, because sometimes we can be neglected in the story, and I thought the museum did a really nice job of including sisters in the narrative. Also, there's a lot of video in the National Museum of African American History and Culture, especially upstairs in the Culture Center. So be careful of getting so glued into video or so glued into music and swiping through the shuffle of the records that you forget about the rest of the museum. There's this wonderful part of the museum where they show Black protagonists throughout the years on American television, and I was so glued to watching them and watching all the good times and Scandal to all those different things that I was like, ooh, I just ate up 45 minutes in the museum just by standing here. Be careful. Fun fact, there's a charging station for your phone on the second floor. You are allowed to use your phone in the museum. You are allowed to take photos. I would suggest, however, that be focused in the present if you can, rather than on taking pictures and proving to people that you finally went to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Just because when you kind of remove yourself from your phone is when you fully immerse yourself into the experience of the museum. One of my favorite things at the museum was to see families together. Is the museum kid friendly? It absolutely is. There's so many interactive things, but it's important that if you're going with a small child, that you walk them through the museum and you have the conversations together. Even if they're hard conversations or you simplify them, it's great to expose them to the history that either they did or did not learn in school, and explain to them why, even though they might have taken for granted that our First Lady and our President for a while were Black, that there's such a cultural and historical significance to their presence in the highest commander-in-chief position, and it was beautiful to see the way in which children interacted with the museum. Plus, it's very interactive, so they don't get bored easy. There's lots of comfy places for them to sit if they get tired. So yeah, that's what I think you need to know before you visit the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. I hope you enjoy your trip. What did you think of the National Museum of African American History and Culture? What do you wish somebody would have told you before you visited? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and don't apologize for living.